1. Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Michael Holden, Vice President of Policy and Chief Economist with the Business Council of Alberta. Thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Well, just the other day, the Statistics Canada came out with its monthly labor force survey. For Alberta, it showed a job loss of about 1,000 people in May. The unemployment rate dropped to 8.7% from 9% the previous month. And year over year, employment is up by 262,600. Tell me what's happening in the labor market in Alberta and what these numbers tell you is going on, Mike.
Well, I mean, the loss of 1,000 jobs in May is really the result of the lockdowns and the increased stringencies that we saw in April and continuing on into May. And so in a way, the loss of 1,000 jobs is a pretty modest number. It's basically flat compared to what we saw in April. And so that's really just this holdover of these stringency measures. I think that if you dig deeper into the numbers, it's actually a little bit more optimistic looking than that 1,000 job losses suggests, because we saw a lot of strength in a range of areas, especially in the goods producing sectors, and the losses that we saw were really concentrated in exactly the areas that were most directly affected by the shutdown. So accommodation, food services, personal services, and healthcare to some degree. And so in those industries, that's where we're seeing the declines. So once we start reopening, in a few days, I think we're going to see a strong rebound in those industries.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Calgary region situation. It showed a 1,000 job gain in May. Year over year, we're up 76,300 in employment. The unemployment rate in May fell from 9.3% in April to 8.7% in May. Same thing, Michael, what's happening in the Calgary region?
Well, it's always a little bit trickier to say whenever you're looking at cities compared to the province as a whole, because the way that the data is collected and presented is different. And so these numbers for Calgary are unadjusted, whereas the Alberta ones are seasonally adjusted, and they're also based on a 3-month moving average. But what we saw in Calgary is a reversal of a decline that we had seen for a few months in the city now, and so that suggests a fairly strong performance in Calgary. What's driving it, we can't really say because we don't have industry level data, but I think that, as I said before, once we start to see these stringency measures reduced and in June, that we're going to start to see even stronger gains in the city.
Yeah, so when we started here June 1st, here just last week, with sort of the reopening phase in Alberta, from the pandemic, we're likely to see more restrictions eased here at the end of this week, near the end of this week, June 10th, with more things opening up. How does that bode for the labor market in the province and in the city in the months to follow?
Well, it's going to have a pretty significant effect because, for the industries I mentioned before, the accommodation, food services, your bars and restaurants, and those businesses that are going to start opening up again. We saw, as you said, a modest increase at the very beginning of June. So once those open up again on the 10th, those industries are still 75,000 jobs short of where they were pre-pandemic. And we're not going to say that all those jobs are going to come back immediately. There's going to be a bit of a ramping up process, but that really is an isolated pocket of weakness in the Alberta economy, because if you look anyplace else, and especially, as I said, in the goods producing sector, in the finance, in professional services, those kinds of industries, they've all been doing quite well, and most have recovered and are beyond where they were pre-pandemic. And so it's that one isolated but very deep pocket of weakness. And as soon as those jobs start to come back, we'll start to see the Alberta economy really take off.
Yeah, speaking of the Alberta economy, today the Conference Board of Canada put out a forecast for the provinces and for Canada. It showed that Alberta was going to be, it's predicting Alberta will show the strongest economic rebound in the country here in the next 2 years. 7.2% year over year growth Forecast for this year, 5.6% for 2022, bearing in mind, obviously, that this is coming after Alberta had the steepest decline in the economy in 2020. What are your thoughts on some of those numbers that the board is putting out, and the quote unquote, I guess, optimism that they have for the province going forward?
Well, there are a couple of things. The first one is, as you said, 2020 Alberta was the worst performing province in the entire country, and that was because we didn't just deal with the pandemic, but also had that period of negative oil prices, about a year ago, 14 months ago, and those really put a dent in the provincial economy. And so when you see this 7.5% snapback for 2021, part of it you have to bear, take with a grain of salt, because it's the bigger the dip before, the easier it is for you to snap right back, because you're still just kind of, a 7% gain on a lower base, you're still not going to be where you were in 2020. And so the steeper the decline, the sharper the snapback. So that's the note of caution. But on the positive side, there are some legitimately good things that are happening in the province. It's not just going to be a snapback story. We've got resurgence in oil prices, extremely strong commodity prices across the board for agricultural goods, for forest products, a lot of these things that are major components of the provincial economy. And so these, with these industries helping grow and lift the Alberta economy, and then plus the fact that they've, once we start to see the other jobs that I talked about earlier coming back, that's what's going to be fueling these gains. And so we're going to see, it's a strong growth rate, small point of caution on the rebound effect, but I think all in all, it's a strong story for Alberta.
Yeah, and we've seen a bunch of interesting news recently here in Calgary, right? With some tech companies coming and expanding, et cetera. That's got to be a sign of hope, that tech sector for the province.
Yeah, the tech sector has really had a pretty solid run, especially in the Calgary area for the last little while. I mean, the existing companies have been doing quite well, and then we saw the Infosys and the Emphasis. I think it's Emphasis, the Indian company that's going to be adding 500 to 1,000 jobs into the Calgary area, and that really is speaking to this growing, burgeoning strength of the tech sector in the city, and that's something that we're really happy about and glad to see, because it helps fuel economic growth, helps bring people into the downtown area in Calgary, and helps diversify the economy into an area that we know is going to be fast growing for years to come. And so we're really excited about that announcement.
Okay, super. Well, thanks again for joining us today, Michael.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, that was Michael Holden, who is Vice President of Policy and Chief Economist for the Business Council of Alberta. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.